it's been a while since a couple of weeks since I put some videos on my Daily J channel on YouTube. I've been going through a lot this week, or at least last couple weeks, and I wanted to share that with you guys. I wanted to share my story. Wanted to share where I'm at, emotionally, mentally, spiritually speaking. I think it's very therapeutic to speak about my story, and yeah, like you read in the title, I am an ex Jehovah Witness. Um, I turn in my letter of disassociation, or that I no longer wanted to be part of the religion, last Saturday. And it was this Wednesday night that um, they officially announced me in public that I no longer was a Jehovah's Witness. So where am I at this moment? Before I get into like a little bit of my background, but yeah, I think right now there is a lot of sadness because it's been months in preparation of me making this decision. Right, it wasn't easy. Um, it wasn't something that just I thought about, like, from one day to another. It was a hard decision. A lot of journaling, a lot of praying, a lot of thinking through, because the consequences are real. As much as the witnesses want to promote in public, right, that they no longer shun, they don't no longer disfellowship. That's what they portray an image to public, but in reality, they still they still in the congregations totally disconnect themselves from you. They shun you. They don't talk to you. And I'll share a little bit about certain personal stories that happened last week or so. Um, but yeah, I feel sad at the moment when it happened, but right now I'm a little bit more calmer, more peaceful, knowing that I feel that I made the right choice for my personal path. And just grateful also for the community that I've been surrounding myself with. I'm just really grateful. So yeah, let's start. My story has three parts basically. So the first part I would say is from the age of 8, 7, 8 years old, when my parents first met the Jehovah's Witnesses here in the United States, up to the age of, I would say, 23, right before I got married. And then the second stage of my life is between 23, 24 years old when I got married, to the age of 34 when I decided to leave. Because, by the way, this Thursday is my birthday, so I'll be 36. So it's been a little bit over a year, year and a half that I left the church, but I officially resigned just recently this past week. So let's start with the first stage. So my parents, I'm Mexican background. I'm not sure if I shared it in my other videos, but Mexican background. My parents immigrated here, to the United States when I was about 1 year old. And all I know is the United States, right? In Florida, that's where I live. And I grew up here, and we were Catholics for, like I said, the first 7 years of my life. So it was all about the Virgin Mary and the cross. We had images on our walls, and my dad was a very devout Catholic. My mom she was into it kind of, but not really. It was more my dad. Um, and yeah, we grew up in that. I remember going to Catholic churches and getting on my knees and saying rosemary prayers, and it was a very small moment, very faint memories, but I do remember. And of course, during this time, the first 7 years of my life, I celebrated Christmas, birthdays, Halloween. I dressed up for Halloween. Yeah, the whole 9 yards, right? Fast forward, I'm about 7, 8 years old, and my parents get the famous knock on the door, like many of you know. And it was Jehovah's Witnesses, and my mom started studying first. The story says, I'm not really, again, this is what my mom and my dad told me over the years, but my dad was very devout Catholic, so he didn't like the witnesses. He wasn't like really into it. Um, but my mom was. And I think that's just as a side note, one of the things that the tactics that the witness use is that they find you in the most vulnerable state emotionally, mentally, to feed off of that and feed you this future that they promote, which sounds very beautiful and people want that. And again, I'm going to be straightforward. I'm not bashing the witnesses. I do think that people do change their behavior because my father was an alcoholic up to the age of 8 years old. And then when he converted to a witness, he stopped drinking. So I do give my dad credit that the religion did do something to him. But those changes are very superficial, and I'll explain later how that works. But yeah, so my mom started studying the Bible first, and my mom told me that my father was opposed. He would want not like she would be able to go, but like he wouldn't allow us to go. So I remember my dad used to bribe me when I remember this when I was 7 years old, and my dad used to play amateur soccer, a league here locally, and I used to like playing with the kids. So my dad would say, "Hey, how about you come play soccer with me instead of going to the Kingdom Hall with your mom?" And me as a child, I wanted to play soccer and not be stuck in a 2 hour meeting, right, where you have to be a robot. And so yeah, that was a battle between my mom and my dad. And my mom gave my dad an ultimatum, and she told him, either you allow me to continue studying with the witnesses and take my children to the meetings, or I will leave you, which is pretty toxic relationship. But anyway, that's a whole different story. So my dad gave in. My dad gave in. He didn't want to lose us. So he gave in. He started studying. And what got my dad was he was a soccer fanatic, and the people from the witnesses, they would play soccer on Sundays. They invited my father, and he got hooked. He got in it, and they would always tell him, like, there's nobody like the witnesses. We don't cuss here when we play, and this and that. And that's kind of true, but there, over the years, there's sometimes, like everywhere else, sometimes witnesses get out of hand during basketball games or soccer games, and things get, a little heated. But again, it's such superficial reasons to get yourself involved in such a, after a while, I realized, such a strict and cultish religion like the witnesses. So, yeah, so my mom gets baptized first. Then my father gets baptized about maybe a little bit less than a year later, and that's where our career starts. I was 8 years old, and during this time between 7 and 8 years old, they had this person study with me the Bible. He taught me how to read Spanish and write Spanish, because at that time I didn't know, it was all English. And I am grateful. I am grateful for that part. I'm grateful for this person that gave me study when I was young. He had the patience. He was like maybe 23, 22 years old. And I really appreciate him. And I've always told him how much I appreciated him. He lives in Tennessee right now. And so, yeah, so I learned how to speak Spanish. I learned how to write basic Spanish. And my career started from there. And I'm sure a lot of ex-witnesses know this. And if you're not familiarized with the witnesses, especially as men, you as boys, young boys and men, you're encouraged to start filling out positions of privilege. They call it privileges, right? Or it's just responsibilities in the congregation. And I remember the beginning privileges that I had. I would help out clean the Kingdom Hall, or distribute literature to different brothers and sisters in the congregation. They really got me involved. And I think my path, everybody's path is different, right? But in my path, so I lacked a lot of validation growing up. I felt very lonely, very unloved. And I talked about that in one of my early videos that I posted on YouTube. And when I saw that I was doing good in the religion, and people were telling my parents, "Oh, your son, he's a good son. He's such a spiritual kid. He has a future in this religion." My parents actually started giving me that validation, and what that does is that it made me click, like, oh, if I do these external actions in the religion, these works, then my parents will look good and thus love me. And yeah, it worked. I mean, it worked because that's what the witnesses are about. The more exposed you are publicly, the more works you're doing, the more spiritual you are, the more liked you are in the congregation, and yeah, the more you're seen, the more you're validated. Now I'll talk a little bit more about that in my other stages of life. But anyways, I became a unbaptized publisher, which is I get the opportunity to knock doors. I started knocking doors at age 8. I grew up and become the typical robot, Jehovah's Witness kid, and wanted to play soccer. That was one of my dreams that I've learned to let go, but I did resent my father because he became very into the religion. Um, he started stepping up the ladder of responsibilities. He became an elder when we were in our teenage years because I'm the oldest, so I'm 2 years older than my sister, which is the middle child, and I'm 5 years older than my younger brother. So the religion and my parents molded us to, exteriorly speaking, like on the outside, we were like the perfect children. We were like the perfect Jehovah Witness children. But years later, having conversations now as an adult with my other siblings, we realized how we were just so like compressed. We were so like not allowed to express ourselves. Like I feel that the religion really kills your soul. It kills your uniqueness as a human being. But yeah, so anyways, from age 8 and on, I just became that typical Jehovah's Witness kid. And then during high school, I feel high school was a big test for me. I started living a double life like a lot of witnesses do. I got myself involved in certain habits and addictions. Um, but again, that's in private, but in public, I was still this perfect witness, right? Because what I see in the witness world is, and it's not to bash on them, but it's so easy to be a hypocrite. It's crazy. It's so easy to be a hypocrite, to be a double face. Because you can literally go in out in service and knock doors and do all these external actions, but then live this life where nobody sees you. Because I know a lot of friends of mine that were like that. I myself was like that, and it's okay as long as you don't get caught. You can live this double life. So I think it's such a fake relationship with God. You're so disconnected from reality. But anyways, when I hit the age of 17, um, my father was an elder, which is like a pastor in the church, and I was named a ministerial servant at 17. So I was like very, the example kid, right? And of course, when you're 17, that's not really the norm typically at that time, because I'm 36 now, or I'll be 36 this week. But at that time, 18 was kind of the age where you became a servant, and 17 was like a special case, right? So I was 17. I still remember it was December, 4 months before my 18th birthday. I got named a ministerial servant, and wow, did that give me so much validation. I felt I was somebody, I was something, right? I was finally seen by my parents, by people around me. So I became a servant, and I was a servant up to the age of 23. That was before I met my wife and before I got married. But again, I was just still living this double life. I still wanted to be part of like just doing my own thing in private, but being the good kid, right? And in the Jehovah's Witness world, and yeah, just looking good in front of people. So that's kind of like my first stage of life, I would say. I'm nothing excited. It's the pretty typical life. But then I hit marriage, right? So I meet my wife. I moved to, even though I was living in a different city than my wife was, but I moved congregations. You're able to kind of ask that you can move where there's need, whatever. And I remember I met some friends and like, hey, just come to our Kingdom Heart church and just help out here, right? I was 22, 23 at that time. And a couple months later, I meet my wife. And when I meet my wife, um, yeah, it was a different world because now I'm, somebody in the organization, and now I'm married. So, of course, you feel even more special, right? Because you're just following the mold, right? Like the mold. And then we get married, and then my wife had a good job. She was an accountant for an insurance company, so she had a well-paying job. We were making good money together. But of course, part of the indoctrination with the Jehovah's Witnesses is they want free labor. So they're like, oh, you guys are young. They recommend not to have kids because the world's gonna end. Typical. And my wife and I decided to get indoctrinated, take the bait, and she left her job about, I would say, 3 years after we got married. She left her well-paying job, and we decided to not buy a house to rent because we were gonna give ourselves to the Lord, right? But again, I'm coming into marriage with with habits, with a lifestyle that people didn't know, in public. But it came out when I got married, and it was very difficult for the 10 years, 11 years that we were together. Because side note, my wife and I are currently separated, on a route for divorce, and I'll get to that part a little bit later. But yeah, so 3 years in, my wife leaves her job, and we want to be pioneers. So we become pioneers, right? We want to live that Jehovah's Witness life, which they encourage the young couples to be pioneers and give yourself for you know for the organization. Thus, you're giving yourself for Jehovah, right? It's like this very toxic, intertwined ideology that if you serve the organization, you're serving God, but that's not how that works. So, anyways, so some years pass. Um, my life, my addictions come out to the light. I stepped down as a ministerial servant during the early years of our marriage. Go through a rough patch, and then a couple years later, I get the privilege of ministerial servant again, and then a couple years later, on the age of 29, I become an elder, and I think this is the part where it gets very unique. That leads me to the next stage, the third stage, because when I become an elder, I actually see what goes on behind the scenes. I was an elder for 4 years, and to see, and I'll be straight up, to see a bunch of traumatized men, including myself, you know, this is before I started taking therapy, traumatized men just seeking power in the elder body, right? I remember a story, right? I won't say names, but I remember a story. The coordinator, which was like the leader of the group of the elders. I was young. I was a hothead. I thought I was like the biggest shit in the world, right? And I remember I challenged him because he was going off a. Because again, if something I know the ex witnesses friends know this, but like if you're not a witness or you're not involved, there's a lot of man-made rules. There's a lot of I think we should do this, especially between the elders. There's it's either I think we should do this, my experience says we should do this, or the governing body says this. But the Bible is not really mentioned a lot, and we have this elder book, right? The shepherding the flock book, that's out there. It's a secret book that the elders have, and it's just all man-made stuff. But anyways, I remember that occasion where the coordinator, there was an issue between some sisters, and the coordinator's wife was involved, and I raised my hand. I'm like, well, doesn't Jesus Christ, the scripture says that they should talk in private? Like, basically, why is he getting involved just because his wife is involved, right? Like, his wife should speak to the sister and in private and fix the matters, right? That's what Jesus says in Matthew 18. And I remember when I said that, he ignored me. It was funny because I was like, okay, that's weird. And I raised my hand again. I'm like, hey, Matthew 18, why aren't we promoting the sisters to take care of their matters between themselves? Why are we getting involved as basically as cops, right? That's not our job. And I remember he got so mad. We were sitting across from each other, and he looks at me. And again, I'm in the Spanish, so everything's in Spanish, right? But I'll translate it for you guys. So I remember he looks at me and he points at me, and he basically says, cállate, tú eres un mocoso. Or I'll translate it in English, like basically, shut the heck up. You're just a child with boogers, basically. Like, who are you to tell me? Because again, this guy was an elder for many, many years, right? And here comes this young 29-year-old trying to tell him, hey, man, the scripture says we should allow them to fix their matters in private before we get involved. So that's just an example of many that I experienced during the 4 years where, like, the men, they're just a, they're just normal men from the streets that get a title, and they think they're somebody. I did that, and I admit that about myself. Like, I was a normal dude, struggling with my addiction, struggling with my double life, and still being a witness in public. And they gave me a title just because I was doing all the things externally, because that's how they gave you your privileges. They gave you your privileges by how much you were exposed in public. So if I was out preaching and people were seeing me give great parts, then okay, this must be a great candidate for an elder. But what is his spiritual life looking like? What does he think about sexuality? What does he think about, how does he treat his wife? Like all these other very important facts aren't really taken into account because it's all just judged by external, right? And that's how they give you the privilege. So yeah, so in my 4 years as an elder, I just everything started well. I would say like the first year, but then the last 3 years was very tough for me because everything is very scripted. I remember giving a part in an assembly or a convention, right? And we're talking about 2-3 thousand people. That was like the one and only time I did it, and I just felt that I couldn't be myself because everything is so scripted. Like there's this guy. If you don't, I'm gonna give him some props. Heliocentric. He has a channel on YouTube, and I was watching him going to kingdom halls, and it's interesting seeing an outsider perspective. And he was saying how witnesses just seem so robotic. Everything is so like like perform, right? And that's how I felt. I felt like it was a performance. Everything had to be like smiling, and everything had to be like welcome brothers, and everything is like this, right? And that's not real life, right? That's not real life. In real life, we can make mistakes. We can be recording these videos and make mistakes, and it's okay. Or screw up on a word, whatever. So, anyways, yeah, I started just not liking this whole robotic mindset. I remember um, right before COVID, my wife and I were assigned to another congregation, kind of far away from our, yeah, a little bit far away from where we live, to help out, right? And I remember, again, I always tended to be like the young elder, right? Because that's another thing. Like at least in the congregations where I was, a bunch of young guys didn't want to be elders, which is crazy, right? They didn't want to be elders. So it's like I guess they kind of knew what I didn't know, or at least they had a mindset of not caring to be an elder, and I was so eager for the validation. But anyway, so we moved to this congregation, and I remember again, me trying to be different, me trying to just let's go to the Bible, right? What does the Bible say, right? And I also became very fluent in the shepherding the flock book, so I would always go to that and try to apply that in any matter that we will be discussing as elders. And I remember I would get the older guys very uncomfortable because the older guys are all about like, oh, my experience, or back in 1975 I did this. Like, dude, nobody cares. We're in 2020 something. Those methods don't work anymore, right? Let's stick to what's current. And I remember the coordinator, again, the one leading the elders. This is a different congregation. He called me one time and he said, "Hey, man, you need to back down on the way you speak. Like we know you read, we know you have knowledge, but we need to learn to speak to some of the guys like if we were talking to women." And I was like, "What?" Like like I gave in, right? Cuz I was like, "Whatever." But I'm like, we're men. We're supposed to talk to each other straightforward and fix any issues, right? But no, we had to be very sensitive with the ones that didn't want to change, that had their strict mindset, right? Like we always had to give in to these people, right? But anyways, so yeah, I would say that during this time, between the age of 29 and 34, my wife and I are going through personal problems. And October of 23, and I'll talk more about that path in other future videos. Today I want to just focus more on my ex Jehovah Witness life and my exit and all that. And at October of 23, my wife like told the elders, the people I was working serving with, basically like all of our issues for the last basically 10 years. And of course that was very, it was very hurtful, but I understand where she was coming from, so it's not like I hold a resentment towards her at this moment. So yeah, I confessed to the elders, yeah, I've been struggling with certain things. I've been trying to figure my life out. I lived a double life for most of my life, and I want to change. I want to be different. And my conscience just really really got to me because like the elders didn't really know what to do with that situation, and they still didn't up to the day that I left. That in November of 2023, I decided to step down as an elder. I gave up my privileges. By the way, it wasn't just, I think that incident with my wife was like the last like straw, basically, like the last drop in the water in the cup. But it had been months that I didn't want to really be an elder anymore. I was tired of this whole competition between traumatized men. They want power, they want to be heard, they want to be seen. And, not to take out like being part of judicial committees. And judicial committees, I'm sure there's a lot of videos out there. Um, Basically, three men sit down with a person that has sinned, right? And we evaluate their repentance. And I'll be honest, like, I did like three of them in 4 years, I think. And man, that did they suck. I just, I felt so guilty. I felt so bad, like sitting on the chair of judge, of being judges and judging this person in front of us. That was like, especially when we had to do it like to a woman, a woman that fell into sin, and we had to like really embarrass this person. It was so uncomfortable. That just turned me off. Like, you know what I'm saying? Because when you read the gospel, right? Like Jesus, when somebody said, I'm a sinner or whatever, Jesus didn't sit them down and ask them, okay, how did you sin? What did you do? What were the details? No, Jesus didn't do that. Jesus said, okay, you're telling me you're repentant. Okay, let's turn around and live differently now, right? What can we do to help you to live different? That should be the goal. But when it comes to this whole judicial committee, I just think it's very rigged. I think it's very unjust, and I just feel I think it's used as a fear tactic. A lot of people don't want to go to the room, right, to the small room and get counseled by the elders or a judicial committee. So I think it's used also as a fear tactic to keep everybody kind of in their place. So yeah. Anyways, so I decided to step down, and basically from the whole year of 2024, I basically started just fading out. I started fading out. Um, I would say in the year 2024, I maybe went to like three meetings, but I was fading out. I wasn't interested. I didn't care to go to Zoom because they do Zoom also, and if you can't go in person, so I didn't care. My wife was still trying to go in the midst of everything. She was trying to go. We had a few heated arguments when I said I'm not going to the meeting, and she's like, "Why not?" And things would get out of hand. And again, I didn't want to be part of it. I didn't gain the courage to actually like resign from the church. Like I was like, let me fade out, let me do my own thing. And in 2024, I really focused into other philosophies. I got into other philosophies. I kind of put the Bible to the side and just got really involved with Stoicism, Buddhism, other stuff. Just trying to find my way, right? Because like I said, one thing that I'm gonna say, and as a Jehovah's Witness, I lost my soul. My soul was destroyed. I wasn't able to fully express myself. I felt that since the age of 8, my life was taken away from me because of supposedly we're serving God, but just to realize that that's not what God is about. God is about being authentic. God is about He wants you to enjoy life. That yeah, life is can be hard sometimes, but life is not the way the witnesses paint it, right? Like witnesses, and they paint that life is fearful, and the world's out to get you, and if you leave the organization, the devil's gonna eat you up and chew you and spit you out. Like that's the famous word, right? And guess what? There's temptations for anybody, witness, non-witness. I knew cases, not just my own, but of a lot of men that fell into different sexual sin, being a witness, and you know what I'm saying? Like guys that lived a double life, guys that were one way in the kingdom hall and one way outside. Like I wasn't the only one. There's a lot of guys in there, especially in the 4 years as an elder. You know a lot of people's business, which is a whole nother story I don't want to be involved in no more. So 2024, I just started studying these philosophies, but I felt empty. I still felt empty. I felt like I wasn't really giving me the purpose because inside of me, I still believed in God. I just felt that I received religious trauma from everything that was happening. So fast forward, end of 2024, November 17. Again, the whole year I'm basically faded out. My wife decides to leave. She decides to leave. She can't bear with the whole situation, and she leaves to her parents. And I don't know what happened, that something clicked, that I had to make like radical change. I needed to go back to God. So I remember praying to God after November 17th of 24 and saying, God, if you're real, um, like present yourself to me, show me who you are, because I thought you were in this organization, and I don't see you're there. I didn't feel you. I went through all my issues and I didn't find any healing, any purpose. It was just basically free labor to these men that would change their mind every so often with rules and stuff like that. And everything was a new light, and it's just so much confusion, so much strict. Everything is so strict. So I remember, I would say like in December, end of December, I think it was end of December, I finally decided to research churches nearby. And I started going. I started going to church. And in the meanwhile, I started binging on YouTube on a bunch of XJW stuff. And I found a lot of great channels. Yes, there's also XJWs that are a bit emotional, and I respect your emotions, but I was really attracted to the JWs that were about facts, that were about analyzing the doctrines. And I just started binging for like literally a whole month. Notes on the doctrine, on when it comes to Jehovah, to Jesus, the Trinity, heaven, hell. I started like looking into the New World Translation, how it's pretty much rigged. And then I knew about this book from my younger sister-in-law's ex-husband. And the book was this one, Crisis of Conscience by Raymond France. I actually got the book today, but I had heard it through Audible some months ago, and I was like, whoa, like this book really opened my mind. I have heard about it, and growing up, I heard about Raymond France and like how he was wicked and an apostate, right? So I was very like, yeah, let me not read that book. But again, when I heard it, it just opened my eyes to how the governing body just doesn't have God's spirit. You know, it's very man-made. It's very cultish. It's very just controlling. And they just all these my theory that all these changes that they're doing now with the beard and the pants and all this stuff, they're losing members. They're losing the new generation, and they just want to keep them. That's what I think. Because the new generation is finding that other churches give more purpose, more meaning, more fulfillment, and actually gets you closer to Christ and to God. So, anyways, going back to what I said, I found a church end of December. I started going, and man, like I remember the first time, like the sermon was so awesome. I started like it just got to my heart. I remember weeping the first day, just what the sermon was about Jesus sacrificing His grace and all that stuff, and I haven't stopped going. But I knew as an elder that what I was doing by going into another church for the Jehovah's Witnesses, that's apostasy, right? That's like the biggest offense you can do to a Jehovah's Witness. Like you can like go and commit all the sexual sin you want, and they can bring you back with no issue. But if you become an apostate to them by going to another church, like that's like the deadly sin, right? So I knew that, right? I knew that. And I didn't want to live a double life no more, right? That's kind of was the big deal with me throughout my whole life as a witness. So I had to prepare my official exit, basically, right? And that was hard. That was hard because I knew the consequences. I knew the consequences. I gave consequences to people where I stopped talking to my friends when they got this fellowship. So I knew what was waiting for me. So again, my wife and I are separated, and I told my wife, hey, I will be leaving the organization. I will be disassociating. And of course, that made things even worse between her and I, not just our issues that we've been having, but not being in the same religion, not being able to hang out with the same friends, and being shunned by the organization, the people. Yeah, it affected my wife. So currently, her and I are in a route of divorce. We're just fixing some issues first before we start the process. Um, and yeah, I exited. I officially exited, like I mentioned earlier. Um, Official letter. I respect anybody that fades out. I really do. I was a faded out really Jehovah's Witness for 1 year almost, but I just felt that I just couldn't. serve this newfound faith because, I'll be straight up with you guys. I believe in Jesus. I believe in the Holy Scriptures. But the doctrines of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and that's what I wrote in my letter of this association. I wrote that, I believe in all these things still. I have faith in God. I just don't have faith in the Jehovah's Witness. I don't have faith in the governing body. I don't think they're the true religion. And again, to all its own, I do say there are channels out there on YouTube that are great. XJW Analyzer. It's like the first one that comes to mind because I binged that one a lot. But there's quite a few out there that are really good. Do your own research. My goal was never to like try to get people out of the religion. That's not my thing. I think everybody should make their own decision. And I do believe is when Jesus Christ calls you to him, especially getting out of a cult, that he'll do it. He'll make it happen, right? And I think that's what he's done in my life. And I'm really grateful to God, and which is why I'm giving my life to Jesus pretty soon, right? Because I got baptized at age 12. I didn't know what I was doing. I got baptized because my cousins were getting baptized and to make my parents happy. It wasn't because I knew what the heck I was doing. And as an adult now, I want to get baptized. I'm going to, give my life to Christ. And hopefully in the next month or so, we have baptism at our church, and I'm going to do it. I'm happy to be where I'm at today. So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell, I'll do more videos kind of breaking down different aspects of life as a witness. But yeah, that's my exit story. I think that if you're in a space of thinking about leaving, I recommend, this is what I did. I wrote the letter and I sat on it and I prayed on it, and I got input I reached out to XJW and, from the XJW community, different people that were very helpful and pivotal to me, getting to that place where I'm like, you know what, I can accept the consequences, and now building my community at a new church. And if my wife and I make the divorce official, life is not over. Life is not over. I'm 36 years old. I'm still young. Um, I will allow God's will to take place in my life wherever he decides to take me. But I am just grateful that I'm out of the Jehovah's Witness world. Yes, my in-laws said they won't talk to me. One of my best friends I called yesterday, and I told him that I left just in case he heard from the grapevine. He was crying on the phone, and he told me, I hope to see you back one day. Basically, that was a goodbye. My sister-in-laws, basically goodbye. And my parents, I sent a video message to my parents, and it's been over a week and they haven't answered. Not sure if they will. I don't think they will. I don't expect that, which is why I encourage anybody that's planning to leave the witness world to start building a community. I think that's what helped me a lot. Before I made this fast, I didn't go fast and just do it, right? I started going to church. I started meeting people, and I'm very grateful. Won't say their names, but I'm very grateful for this older couple in my new church. That God bless them. God bless them. I pray for them. They've been such beautiful souls and people in my life to just take me under the wings and encourage me and love me and give me the true meaning of Jesus Christ's love. I really, really appreciate them. I pray for them. And if they'll ever watch this video, they know who I'm talking about. But yeah, that's my story. Really appreciate the time, the space. And yeah, just I'm gonna end it with a scripture that really, especially the end of 2024, really got me into not being scared to investigate your doctrines. Don't be scared. It's not devilish. It's your right. It's your purpose as a human to do research on your own faith, on your own life, see if it's actually aligning to God's. And the Bible verse is Acts chapter 17, verse 11. It says, "Now these Jews were more noble than those in Thessalonica. They received the word with all eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see if these things were so." So I love what I heard one time from Mike Winger. He has a YouTube channel, guys. I recommend it. He's awesome. He has great information on how to deal with witnesses and all their doctrines. But he said, if any organization leader or any pastor says, don't Google me, then that's a red flag. And you should Google that organization or that leader. And going back to the scripture, let's have the eagerness to daily examine the scriptures and allow the scriptures, and specifically the gospels that talk about Jesus, be our guiding light, not men that don't actually seek Jesus for guidance and they base everything they do on their agenda, on what they how they want to take benefit from basically their members. They want to take advantage of their members. So that's what I got, guys. Much love. I'll be posting more videos about different aspects of my exit as a JW. See where this goes, and yeah, I just appreciate. Again, I give props to the XJW community on YouTube. I learned a lot. Really appreciate it. Yeah. See you next time.